Ireland, 1963. Part 1. The Sound of Faith. The village of Dunmore clung to the edge of Ireland like a pearl on the coast, hidden among the crags and cliffs that guarded it from the fierce Atlantic winds. Time seemed to have forgotten this place, leaving it untouched by the modern world's hurried pace. The cobblestone streets wound through the village like veins, leading to the heart of its people, simple, devout, and bound by traditions as ancient as the land itself. The air was often thick with the scent of salt water, mingling with the earthy aroma of peat fires that warmed the small, thatched cottages scattered across the hills. It was in one such cottage, perched precariously on the edge of the cliffs, that Eileen O'Connell lived with her grandmother, Moira. The house, though modest, was sturdy, with walls thick enough to withstand the fury of the Atlantic storms that frequently lashed the coast. Inside, it was a place of warmth and comfort, with every surface telling a story: family photographs, a well-worn Bible on the mantel, and the faint scent of lavender that Moira used to keep the linens fresh. Eileen had been born in this cottage, and it was the only home she had ever known. From the moment she entered the world, it was clear that her life would be different. Her eyes, though as blue as the summer sky, never sparkled with the light of recognition. Eileen was blind, a fact that brought sorrow to her parents' hearts but never diminished their love for her. They saw her blindness not as a curse but as a challenge, one that they met with endless patience and devotion. Tragically, Eileen's parents were lost to the sea when she was just a baby. It was a storm, one of those wild tempests that the Atlantic was infamous for, that claimed their lives. Their boat, a sturdy fishing vessel, was no match for the towering waves and the howling winds. The sea, which had provided so much for the village, took from Eileen the very people who had given her life. Moira, heartbroken but resilient, took on the responsibility of raising her granddaughter, determined to fill the void left by her daughter and son-in-law. From a young age, Eileen learned to navigate the world without sight, relying on her other senses to understand the world around her. The sound of the waves crashing against the cliffs became her clock, the call of seabirds her weather vane, and the feel of the sun on her face her compass. Moira, with her soft voice and gentle hands, guided Eileen through her days, teaching her the rhythms of life in Dunmore. Together, they tended a small garden, grew herbs, and cared for the few animals they kept, a couple of hens and a goat named Bridget, who provided them with fresh milk. Despite her blindness, Eileen's spirit was bright. She had an extraordinary ability to find joy in the smallest things: a warm cup of tea, the feel of fresh linen under her fingers, the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls. But it was her voice that set her apart. From the time she could speak, it was clear that Eileen had been blessed with a gift. Her voice was pure, sweet, and hauntingly beautiful, capable of moving even the hardest of hearts. Moira encouraged this gift, teaching Eileen the old hymns that had been passed down through their family for generations. Every evening, after the chores were done and the sun had set behind the hills, Eileen would sit by the fire and sing. Her voice filled the cottage, spilling out through the cracks in the walls and the open windows, carried on the wind to the village below. Those who heard it often stopped in their tracks, caught by the beauty of the sound, their hearts stirred by the emotion in her voice. Eileen's singing did not go unnoticed. Father Declan, the village priest, had first heard her during a service at the small church that stood at the center of Dunmore. It was a cold Sunday morning, the kind that made the old stone church feel more like a crypt than a place of worship. The congregation, huddled in their coats, shivered in the pews as Father Declan read from the gospel. When it came time for the hymns, the villagers sang half-heartedly, their voices barely rising above a murmur. But then, Eileen's voice broke through the cold silence. She sang with a power and clarity that filled the church, lifting the spirits of everyone present. The cold seemed to melt away, replaced by a warmth that came from deep within. Father Declan, who had been at the pulpit, found himself momentarily speechless, overwhelmed by the beauty of the sound. After the service, he approached Eileen and Moira, his eyes shining with admiration. "Eileen," he said, "your voice is a gift from God. You bring light to this village, and I am certain that your singing touches the hearts of all who hear it. Please continue to share this gift with us." Eileen blushed at the praise, her cheeks turning pink. "Thank you, Father," she replied softly. "I only wish to bring joy to others." And so, Eileen became a regular presence at the church, her voice a beacon of hope for the villagers who faced the hardships of life on the coast. The church, once struggling to fill its pews, now drew more worshipers each week, all eager to hear Eileen sing. Her hymns, filled with faith and emotion, reminded the villagers of the beauty and grace in the world, even in the face of life's challenges. But it wasn't just in church that Eileen's voice brought comfort. On many nights, when the sea roared and the wind howled, she would sing from her cottage, her voice rising above the storm, offering a sense of peace to those who listened. It was as if her songs had the power to calm the very elements, to bring order to the chaos of the natural world. Then, one evening, as Eileen prepared for bed, something extraordinary happened. She had just finished her nightly prayers, her voice soft and reverent as she spoke to God, asking for His protection and guidance. The window of her small room was open, allowing the cool night air to flow in, carrying with it the scent of the sea and the distant sound of the waves crashing against the cliffs. As she climbed into bed, pulling the blankets up to her chin, a new sound reached her ears. It was faint at first, so faint that she wondered if she had imagined it. But as she lay still, listening intently, the sound grew clearer. It was music, a melody so delicate and pure that it seemed to come from another world. Eileen held her breath, afraid to move, afraid that the slightest sound would shatter the spell. The music was unlike anything she had ever heard. It was not the music of the earth, not the sound of any instrument she knew. It was as if the stars themselves were singing, their voices blending into a single, ethereal harmony that filled the room with light and warmth. The music wrapped around her like a blanket, soothing her soul, filling her with a sense of peace and joy that brought tears to her eyes. She felt as though she were floating, carried away on the wings of the melody, lifted to a place where there was no pain, no sorrow, only love and light. The music played for what felt like an eternity, though in reality, it was only a few minutes. When it finally faded, leaving only the sound of the waves and the wind, Eileen remained still, her heart beating fast, her mind racing with questions. Where had the music come from? What did it mean? Eileen knew she had to tell her grandmother. She climbed out of bed and made her way to Moira's room, her hands trembling with excitement. Moira, who had been asleep, woke as soon as Eileen entered, her instincts attuned to her granddaughter's every movement. "Gran," Eileen whispered, her voice trembling with emotion, "I heard something tonight. It was music, but not like any music I've ever heard before. It was beautiful, Gran. It felt like angels were singing." Moira, who had heard many strange things in her life, sat up and took Eileen's hand. "Tell me, child, what did you hear?" Eileen described the music as best she could, her words stumbling over one another in her eagerness to convey the experience. Moira listened intently, her wise old eyes narrowing slightly as she took in her granddaughter's words. When Eileen finished, Moira was silent for a long moment, her mind turning over the possibilities. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and serious. "Eileen, my dear, I believe you have been blessed. The Lord works in mysterious ways, and perhaps He has chosen you to receive this gift." "But why me?" Eileen asked, her voice filled with wonder. Moira smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from Eileen's face. "Perhaps it is because you have always had faith, even when life has been difficult. The Lord sees your heart, Eileen, and he knows that you will use this gift wisely." Eileen nodded, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. "I hope I can, Gran. I really do." That night, Eileen lay awake in bed, her mind filled with the memory of the music. She replayed it over and over in her mind, afraid that if she fell asleep, she might never hear it again. The next day, she told Father Declan about the experience, and he listened with rapt attention. "It sounds like a divine sign, Eileen," he said, his voice filled with reverence. "You must continue to listen to see if the music returns. This could be a message from God, meant for you." And so, Eileen waited. Each night, she prayed fervently, asking for the music to return. And each night, her prayers were answered. The music came at the same time, filling her room with its heavenly melody. It was as if the angels themselves had descended to sing her to sleep. Eileen's life, once so ordinary, had become something extraordinary. The music brought her a sense of purpose, a connection to something greater than herself. She began to feel that she was part of a larger plan, that her life had a meaning she had never before imagined. But Eileen was not the only one to be touched by the music. Moira, too, began to hear it, her heart swelling with pride and awe as she realized the magnitude of what was happening. Together, they sat in the cottage each evening, listening to the music that flowed like a river from the heavens. Word of the music began to spread through the village, carried by those who had heard it and those who had only heard of it. The people of Dunmore, who had always been deeply faithful, were quick to see the music as a sign from God, a blessing bestowed upon their humble village. The village, once quiet and sleepy, began to stir with excitement. People gathered in small groups, whispering about the miracle that was unfolding in their midst. The news spread beyond the village, reaching neighboring towns, and soon, people began to arrive, drawn by the promise of hearing the angelic music for themselves. The atmosphere in Dunmore was charged with anticipation. Each evening, more and more people gathered outside Eileen's cottage, hoping to catch a glimpse of the miraculous event. Though not everyone could hear the music, those who did spoke of it in hushed tones, their voices filled with awe and reverence. Eileen, though overwhelmed by the attention, remained humble. She saw herself not as the source of the miracle, but as a vessel through which God's grace was being shown. She continued to sing in the church, her voice more beautiful than ever, and each note seemed to carry the weight of the divine. Father Declan, once a skeptic of such phenomena, found his faith renewed by the music. He began to organize special services at the church, inviting the villagers to come and pray for guidance and understanding. The church, which had once struggled to fill its pews, was now overflowing with worshipers, all eager to be part of the miracle. And so, the village of Dunmore, once a quiet and forgotten place, became the center of a story that would be told for generations. The music of the angels had brought with it a sense of hope, a reminder that in a world filled with challenges and hardships, there was still room for the miraculous, for the divine to touch the lives of the ordinary. As Eileen lay in bed each night, listening to the music that had become a part of her life, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She did not know what the future held, but she knew that she was not alone. The angels were with her, guiding her, filling her heart with a joy that could only come from heaven. And in that small cottage by the sea, where the waves crashed against the cliffs and the wind sang through the cracks in the walls, Eileen knew that her life had been forever changed. Part 2. The Gathering. The village of Dunmore, once a quiet and unassuming place, began to change as word of the angelic music spread beyond its borders. What had started as a whispered rumor among the villagers had now become a story that traveled far and wide, reaching towns and cities across Ireland. The music, described as a divine melody, brought with it an allure that drew people from all walks of life, eager to witness the miracle for themselves. It began with the neighboring villages. Farmers, fishermen, and their families, who had always viewed Dunmore as a place much like their own, now saw it as a beacon of divine favor. They arrived in small groups, on foot or by cart, their faces filled with a mixture of curiosity and reverence. Some came out of simple curiosity, wondering if the stories they had heard were true. Others, more devout, believed that the music was a sign from God, a call to strengthen their faith. The influx of visitors did not go unnoticed. The once peaceful village square, where children had played and neighbors had exchanged pleasantries, was now bustling with activity. Market stalls, which had previously sold only the essentials, fresh fish, potatoes, and bread, began to offer religious artifacts. Vendors appeared seemingly overnight, selling rosaries, candles, and small statues of saints. The scent of incense filled the air, mingling with the saltiness of the sea breeze, creating an atmosphere that was both sacred and festive. Eileen's cottage, perched on the edge of the cliffs, became the focal point of the gathering crowds. People would stand outside, sometimes for hours, hoping to catch a note of the angelic music that had captivated the village. Though Eileen remained inside, her presence was felt by all who came. To them, she was no longer just a young woman living in a remote village. She was a conduit for the divine, chosen by God to share this miraculous gift with the world. Father Declan, recognizing the growing interest and the potential for both spiritual renewal and discord, decided to take a more active role. He saw an opportunity to guide the people, to help them find meaning in the miracle that was unfolding before them. He began organizing nightly vigils at the church, encouraging the villagers and visitors alike to gather in prayer and reflection. The small stone church, once half empty on Sundays, now struggled to accommodate the throngs of people who came each evening, their hearts full of hope and wonder. The vigils were simple but powerful. Father Declan would lead the congregation in hymns and prayers, his deep voice resonating through the church. But the highlight of each night was always Eileen singing. Though she never sought the attention, her voice had become a symbol of the village's newfound connection to the divine. Each night, as she sang, the congregation would fall silent, their hearts lifted by the purity of her voice. It was as if, through her, they could touch a piece of heaven. But as the crowds grew, so too did the challenges. The village, never having hosted such numbers, began to feel the strain. The narrow streets, once sufficient for the modest traffic of villagers, became congested with the constant flow of visitors. The local inn, run by a cheerful woman named Bridget, was soon overwhelmed with guests. Bridget, who had always prided herself on providing a warm welcome and a comfortable bed, found herself turning people away for the first time in her life. She did her best to accommodate as many as she could, often giving up her own room to make space for those who had traveled from afar. The strain was not just physical. The sudden influx of people brought with it a clash of cultures and beliefs. While many visitors came with open hearts, seeking to experience the divine music, others came with skepticism and doubt. Among them was Patrick Donnelly, a journalist from Dublin, known for his hard-hitting articles that often debunked claims of the supernatural. Patrick was a man of reason, someone who believed that every phenomenon, no matter how extraordinary, had a logical explanation. He arrived in Dunmore with the intent of uncovering the truth behind the angelic music, certain that it was a hoax or, at best, a natural occurrence misinterpreted by the villagers. Patrick rented a room at Bridget's Inn, and from the moment he arrived, he set about his investigation with the tenacity of a man on a mission. He spoke to the villagers, asking probing questions about what they had heard and seen. He interviewed Father Declan, pressing him on the specifics of the vigils and the claims of miraculous healings that had begun to circulate. He even attempted to speak with Eileen, though she remained elusive, preferring the solitude of her cottage to the prying eyes of the curious. Despite his efforts, Patrick found little to support his skepticism. The villagers' accounts were consistent, their faith unwavering. The healings, though not yet verified by any medical professionals, were reported with such sincerity that even Patrick began to question his own doubts. Still, he was determined to uncover the truth, whatever it might be. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the village square continued to evolve. What had started as a gathering of the faithful now included merchants and entertainers, all hoping to profit from the influx of visitors. Musicians played traditional Irish tunes, their lively melodies adding to the festive air. Children ran between the stalls, their laughter mingling with the sound of coins exchanging hands. There was a sense of excitement, of being part of something larger than life, something that transcended the ordinary. But beneath the surface, tensions were beginning to brew. The villagers, who had initially welcomed the visitors, began to feel the pressure of the growing crowds. Supplies, which had always been sufficient for the small community, were now running low. The fishermen, who had always brought in enough catch to feed the village, found their boats overwhelmed by the demand. Even the well, a source of fresh water for generations, began to show signs of strain. Moira, ever the pillar of strength for Eileen, noticed the changes with a heavy heart. She saw the lines of worry on the faces of the villagers, heard the whispers of discontent. Though she remained steadfast in her faith, she could not ignore the growing divide between those who believed wholeheartedly in the miracle and those who questioned its authenticity. She worried for Eileen, who had become the unwilling center of this maelstrom. Moira knew that her granddaughter's heart was pure, her faith unshakable, but she also knew that the world outside their cottage was not as kind. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the village, Moira and Eileen sat together by the fire, their hands busy with the simple tasks of mending and knitting. The music had not yet begun, and the cottage was filled with the comforting sounds of crackling wood and the gentle hum of Eileen's voice as she worked. "Gran," Eileen said softly, her fingers deftly threading a needle. "Do you think all of this, everything that's happening, is what God intended? The people, the crowds, it feels like the village is changing, and I'm not sure if it's for the better." Moira paused, looking up from her knitting to study her granddaughter's face. Though Eileen could not see her, Moira knew that Eileen could sense her every thought, every emotion. It was one of the many gifts that had come with her blindness, a deep, intuitive understanding of the world around her. "I don't know, Eileen," Moira replied gently, "but I do believe that everything happens for a reason, even if we can't see it right away. The Lord has chosen you for something special, and with that comes both joy and responsibility. We must trust in His plan, even when it's difficult." Eileen nodded, though the weight of her thoughts still pressed on her heart. She knew that the music was a blessing, a sign of God's presence, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it had brought with it challenges she had never anticipated. Outside, the village square buzzed with activity. The sun had set, and the flickering light of lanterns cast long shadows across the cobblestones. People gathered in groups, sharing stories and speculating about the origin of the music. Some claimed to have seen visions, others spoke of miraculous healings. But beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent of uncertainty, a sense that the miracle was not without its costs. Patrick, ever the skeptic, wandered the square, observing the people, taking notes. He couldn't deny the impact the music had on those who heard it. There was a palpable sense of hope, a renewal of faith that was almost tangible. Yet he remained unconvinced. He knew that miracles were often the result of wishful thinking, of people seeing what they wanted to see rather than what was actually there. As the night deepened, the air grew colder, and the crowd began to thin. But those who remained were the most devout, the ones who would not leave until they had experienced the music for themselves. They gathered outside Eileen's cottage, their breath visible in the cool night air, their eyes fixed on the small window from which the music seemed to emanate. And then, as if on cue, the music began. It started softly, a single note that hung in the air like a whisper, before swelling into a full, glorious melody. The crowd fell silent, their hearts lifted by the sound. It was as if the music spoke to each person individually, touching them in ways that words could not. Patrick stood at the edge of the crowd, his pen poised above his notebook, but he found himself unable to write. The music, so pure and otherworldly, filled him with a sense of wonder he hadn't felt in years. It was as if the doubts that had plagued him, the skepticism that had defined his career, melted away in the face of something so undeniably beautiful. For a moment, Patrick allowed himself to believe, to truly believe, that what he was hearing was a miracle. And in that moment, he felt a connection to the people around him, to the village, to something greater than himself. But as quickly as the music began, it ended, leaving the night in a silence that felt both heavy and sacred. The crowd remained still, as if unwilling to break the spell. It was Eileen's voice, soft but clear, that finally brought them back to reality. "Thank you," she said, her words carried on the wind to those gathered outside. "Thank you for being here, for believing. May God bless you all." The crowd began to disperse, their hearts full, their spirits lifted. Patrick, still standing at the edge, watched as the people left, their faces glowing with a quiet joy. He knew that he had come to Dunmore to uncover the truth, but he was beginning to realize that the truth might be more complex than he had imagined. As he walked back to the inn, the sound of the music still echoing in his mind, Patrick couldn't help but wonder if he had been wrong. Perhaps there was more to this world than could be explained by logic and reason. Perhaps, just perhaps, there were miracles that defied understanding. And so, the village of Dunmore continued to gather each night, drawn by the music that had become a beacon of faith and hope. The crowds grew, the stories spread, and the village square buzzed with life. But beneath it all, there was a sense that something was building, something that would soon come to a head. For Eileen, Moira, and the people of Dunmore, the music was not just a sound. It was a call to faith, to community, to something greater than themselves. And as the nights grew longer and the crowds larger, they all felt it, the gathering of something powerful, something that would change their lives forever. Part 3. The Trial of Faith. The miracle of the angelic music, which had drawn so many to the village of Dunmore, had become both a blessing and a burden. As the weeks passed, the influx of pilgrims, the growing commercialism, and the rising tensions began to weigh heavily on the villagers. What had started as a divine gift, a pure and simple manifestation of God's grace, was now at the center of a storm of doubt, greed, and skepticism. The once harmonious village square, where people had gathered in joy and reverence, was now a place of division. The market stalls, once filled with simple goods, were now crowded with merchants hawking religious relics, souvenirs, and other trinkets to the visiting pilgrims. The air, once filled with the scent of fresh bread and the salty tang of the sea, now carried the heavy aroma of incense and the din of haggling voices. The atmosphere had shifted from one of sacred wonder to one of worldly chaos. Eileen, who had become the unwilling symbol of this miracle, could feel the change acutely. The peace and joy that the music had initially brought to her life were now overshadowed by the tension that seemed to seep into every corner of the village. She could sense the doubt in the voices of some of the visitors, hear the arguments that broke out among the crowds, and feel the weight of the expectations placed upon her. The very thing that had once uplifted her spirit now seemed to press down upon her, heavy and unrelenting. Moira, always protective of her granddaughter, watched the transformation of the village with growing concern. She saw the way the crowds swelled each evening, the way Eileen's name was whispered in awe and in envy. Moira had lived long enough to know that where there was faith, there was also the potential for doubt and betrayal. She had seen it before in other places, other times. Miracles could inspire, but they could also divide. And the division was beginning to take root in Dunmore. The church, which had been the spiritual heart of the village, was now the epicenter of the growing conflict. Father Declan, who had initially embraced the miracle with open arms, found himself caught between his faith and the pressure of those who demanded proof. The skeptics, led by Patrick Donnelly, had grown more vocal, their demands for an investigation into the music's origins becoming impossible to ignore. They claimed that the church was exploiting the miracle for its own gain, that the music was nothing more than a cleverly orchestrated hoax designed to draw in pilgrims and their money. Father Declan, a man of deep faith but also of reason, knew that he had to address these accusations. He had spent his life serving the people of Dunmore, guiding them through times of hardship and doubt. But this was different. The stakes were higher, the scrutiny more intense. He could not afford to be wrong, and yet, in his heart, he believed in the divine nature of the music. He had felt its power, witnessed its effect on the people. But belief alone would not be enough to silence the doubters. The decision to allow an investigation was not made lightly. Father Declan gathered the village elders, men and women who had lived in Dunmore all their lives, who had seen the village through its darkest days. They met in the small vestry of the church, the air thick with the scent of candle wax and old wood. The elders, their faces lined with years of toil and prayer, listened as Father Declan laid out the situation. "We must protect the sanctity of this miracle," he said, his voice steady but tinged with worry. "But we must also face the questions that have arisen. If we refuse to allow an investigation, the doubt will fester, and the division will only grow." The elders nodded in agreement, their expressions somber. They understood the gravity of the situation. The music had brought a light to Dunmore, but that light was now casting shadows that could not be ignored. Patrick Donnelly, ever the skeptic, was chosen to lead the investigation. His reputation as a journalist who uncovered the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, made him both the ideal candidate and a figure of controversy. To some, he was a necessary voice of reason, a man who could cut through the superstition and reveal the truth. To others, he was an outsider, a man who would bring only doubt and division to their village. The investigation began quietly, with Patrick and his small team of assistants examining every aspect of the phenomenon. They measured the acoustics of the village, searching for natural explanations for the music. They interviewed the villagers, gathering testimony from those who had heard the music and those who had experienced its supposed healing effects. They even examined the church and Eileen's cottage, looking for hidden speakers or any other signs of deception. But no matter how thorough their investigation, they found nothing to disprove the miracle. The music defied all attempts to explain it away. It was not a natural phenomenon, nor could it be attributed to any human intervention. It simply was a presence, an experience that could not be captured by science or reason. Despite the lack of evidence, the investigation only served to deepen the divisions within the village. Those who had always believed in the miracle felt vindicated by the failure to disprove it, their faith strengthened by the trial. But those who had harbored doubts found their skepticism hardening into cynicism. They believed that the investigation had been flawed, that the truth had been hidden, or worse, that the miracle was a fabrication designed to exploit their faith. The village square, once a place of gathering and community, became a battleground of ideologies. Arguments broke out between believers and skeptics, each side entrenched in their views. The pilgrims who had come seeking healing and hope found themselves caught in the middle, unsure of what to believe. The market stalls, once filled with the hum of commerce, now echoed with the sharpness of discord. Eileen, who had always been at the center of the miracle, felt the weight of the investigation most acutely. She had never sought the attention or the adulation that had been thrust upon her. All she had ever wanted was to sing, to share the gift that she had been given. But now, her voice had become a symbol, a point of contention that she could not control. One evening, after another day of investigation and turmoil, Eileen found herself standing outside the church, the cool night air wrapping around her like a shroud. The village square was quiet, The crowds dispersed for the night, but the tension lingered in the air. She could feel it, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Father Declan approached her, his footsteps soft on the cobblestones. He had watched over her since she was a child, had seen the light in her that others often overlooked. But now, as he stood beside her, he saw the weariness in her posture, the strain in her usually serene expression. "Eileen," he said gently, "this burden is not yours to bear alone. You have brought so much light to this village, to all of us. But you must not let the darkness of doubt and division weigh upon your heart." Eileen turned her face toward him, her unseeing eyes filled with a sorrow that only he could truly understand. "Father, I don't know what to do. The music, it was a blessing, but now it feels like a curse. People are fighting, questioning each other's faith. I never wanted this. I just wanted to sing, to share the beauty that I felt." Father Declan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I know, my child, and you have done nothing wrong. This trial is not a punishment, but a test of faith for all of us. The Lord works in ways we cannot always understand, but we must trust in His plan, even when it is difficult." Eileen nodded, though her heart remained heavy. She had always believed that her voice was a gift from God, a way to bring joy and comfort to others. But now, she wasn't so sure. She felt as though she had become a pawn in a game she didn't understand, caught between forces beyond her control. As the night deepened, Eileen and Father Declan stood in silence, the cool breeze rustling the leaves of the trees that lined the square. The church, once a sanctuary of peace, now felt like a fortress under siege, its walls bearing the brunt of the village's doubts and fears. The investigation continued for several more days, but it became clear that no definitive answers would be found. The music, still as elusive and mysterious as ever, defied all attempts to explain it. It was a phenomenon that existed beyond the realm of reason, a miracle that could only be understood through the lens of faith. In the end, the investigation was inconclusive. Patrick Donnelly, despite his best efforts, could not provide the answers he had sought. He left Dunmore with more questions than he had arrived with, his skepticism tempered by the inexplicable experience he had witnessed. He had come to the village to expose a fraud, but instead, he found himself confronting the possibility that there were things in this world that could not be explained by logic alone. The villagers, too, were left to grapple with the aftermath of the investigation. Some clung to their faith, believing that the music was a divine gift that had been tested and proven true. Others, however, remained skeptical, their doubts deepening in the face of uncertainty. The division that had taken root in the village did not disappear, but it did not consume them either. It was a trial, a test of faith that each person would have to navigate in their own way. For Eileen, the trial was not over. The music continued to play each night, its beauty undiminished, but it now carried a weight that it had not before. She felt the burden of expectation, the pressure to be more than she was, to be a symbol, a beacon of faith. It was a role she had not asked for, but one that had been thrust upon her by circumstances beyond her control. Yet, in the quiet moments, when the music filled the air and the village square was still, Eileen found solace. She knew that the music was not hers to control, that it was a gift from God, a reminder of His presence in a world that often seemed dark and uncertain. She understood that her role was not to explain the miracle, but to live it, to embody the faith that had brought it into being. And so, as the village of Dunmore continued to wrestle with the questions and doubts that the music had stirred, Eileen remained a steadfast figure of hope. Her voice, as pure and clear as ever, continued to rise above the noise and confusion, a reminder of the beauty and mystery that could be found in the most unexpected places. In the end, the trial of faith was not about finding answers, but about embracing the unknown, about trusting in the divine plan that guided their lives. It was a lesson that Eileen and the people of Dunmore would carry with them for the rest of their days. Part 4. The miracle unfolds. The investigation may have concluded, but the reverberations of doubt and belief continued to ripple through Dunmore. The village was no longer the serene, tucked-away corner of Ireland that it had been. It had become a place of pilgrimage, conflict, and, above all, transformation. The air itself seemed charged with anticipation, as if the land and sea were holding their breath, waiting for the next chapter of the unfolding miracle. Eileen, the young woman at the heart of it all, had not found the peace she longed for. Despite her unwavering faith in the support of Father Declan and her grandmother, Moira, she felt the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. The music, once a source of pure joy, now carried with it the burden of expectation, doubt, and even fear. Every night, as the celestial notes filled the air, she couldn't help but wonder what it all meant. Was she meant to do something more? Was there a greater purpose that she had yet to understand? One crisp autumn evening, Eileen found herself drawn to the cliffs overlooking the Atlantic. The sky was a deep indigo, the first stars beginning to twinkle in the fading light. The sea below was restless, the waves crashing against the rocks with a fury that mirrored her own turbulent emotions. She stood at the edge, the wind whipping her hair around her face, her senses heightened by the sounds and smells of the ocean. Here, on the cliffs, she felt closer to God, closer to understanding the mystery that had enveloped her life. Eileen often came to this spot when she needed to think, to pray, to find clarity. It was a place where she could be alone with her thoughts, away from the crowds, the questions, the pressure. As she stood there, she felt the familiar stirrings of the music begin to rise within her. But this time it was different. The melody was deeper, richer, as if it carried with it the weight of the ocean, the sky, and the very earth beneath her feet. She closed her eyes and let the music wash over her, feeling it resonate in her very bones. It was as if the angels were not just singing to her, but through her, their voices blending with her own in a harmony that transcended the physical world. The notes swirled around her, lifting her spirit, filling her with a sense of purpose that she had never felt before. And then, amidst the music, Eileen heard something new, a voice, clear and strong, speaking directly to her heart. It was a voice of comfort, of reassurance, telling her that she was not alone, that she had been chosen for a reason. The message was simple but profound. Have faith, Eileen. You are the vessel of our song. Through you, the world will know our love. Eileen's heart swelled with emotion, tears streaming down her face as the words sank in. She understood now. The music was not just a gift. It was a message, a call to action. She was not meant to keep it to herself, to let it be a source of division and doubt. She was meant to share it, to spread the love and faith that it embodied. But how? How could she, a blind girl from a small village, fulfill such a monumental task? The doubts that had plagued her before began to resurface, but this time, they were met with a renewed sense of determination. She would not let fear hold her back. She would trust in the message she had received, trust that God had a plan for her, even if she could not see it. The next morning, Eileen shared her experience with Moira and Father Declan. They listened with rapt attention, their own faith strengthened by the conviction in her voice. Moira, ever the wise and protective grandmother, felt a mixture of pride and concern. She knew that Eileen was special, that she had been chosen for something extraordinary. But she also knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, obstacles that Eileen would have to overcome. Yet, as she looked into her granddaughter's face, she saw a strength and determination that reassured her. Eileen was ready. Father Declan, too, felt a sense of purpose take root in his heart. He had always believed in the miracle, but now he saw that it was more than just a sign from God. It was a mission. He knew that he had to help Eileen fulfill her destiny, to guide her and the village through the trials that lay ahead. Together, they decided that the next vigil at the church would be different. It would not be just a time of prayer and reflection, but a call to action, a time to unite the village and the pilgrims in a shared purpose. Father Declan spread the word throughout the village, inviting everyone to come, to witness the unfolding of the miracle, to be a part of something greater than themselves. The night of the vigil, the church was filled to capacity, the air thick with anticipation. The villagers, who had once been divided by doubt and skepticism, now came together, united by the hope that Eileen's message had inspired. The pilgrims, who had traveled from far and wide, stood shoulder to shoulder with the locals, their hearts open and ready to receive whatever the night would bring. Eileen stood at the front of the church, her hands clasped in prayer, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of the moment, the eyes of the congregation upon her, but she also felt a deep sense of peace. She knew that she was not alone, that the angels were with her, guiding her every step. As Father Declan began the service, leading the congregation in hymns and prayers, the atmosphere in the church shifted. There was a palpable sense of something sacred, something holy, filling the space. The familiar notes of the hymns seemed to blend with the angelic music that had become a nightly occurrence, creating a harmony that resonated deep within the souls of all who were present. Then, as the final hymn ended, Eileen stepped forward. The church fell silent, the only sound the soft rustling of the wind outside. She took a deep breath, feeling the music rise within her, and then she began to sing. Her voice, as pure and clear as ever, filled the church, carrying with it the message that she had received on the cliffs. The notes soared, lifting the hearts of the congregation, filling them with a sense of awe and wonder. It was as if the angels themselves had descended, their voices blending with Eileen's, creating a melody that was both earthly and divine. As Eileen sang, something extraordinary began to happen. The atmosphere in the church shifted once more, the very air seeming to shimmer with a golden light. The congregation, their eyes wide with amazement, watched as the light grew brighter, filling the church with a warmth that was both comforting and overwhelming. And then, as the music reached its crescendo, the light coalesced into a single, radiant beam that shone down upon Eileen. The congregation gasped, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and reverence. They knew, in that moment, that they were witnessing a true miracle, a sign from God, a confirmation of the divine message that Eileen had been given. The beam of light, warm and golden, enveloped Eileen, lifting her spirit, filling her with a sense of peace and purpose that she had never known before. She could feel the presence of the angels, their love, their guidance, as they infused her with their strength. The doubts and fears that had plagued her were washed away, replaced by a deep, abiding faith that she was on the right path, that she was fulfilling her destiny. The congregation, too, felt the power of the moment. As they watched the light surround Eileen, they knew that they were witnessing something holy, something beyond the realm of human understanding. Their hearts swelled with faith, their spirits lifted by the presence of the divine. The divisions that had once torn the village apart seemed to melt away, replaced by a sense of unity, of shared purpose. As the light slowly faded, leaving the church in a peaceful glow, Eileen's voice continued to resonate, carrying the last notes of the angelic melody. The congregation, still in awe of what they had witnessed, remained silent, their hearts filled with reverence and gratitude. Father Declan, his own faith renewed by the miracle, stepped forward to address the congregation. His voice, filled with emotion, echoed through the church. "My dear brothers and sisters," he began, "we have been blessed tonight with a sign from God, a confirmation of the miracle that has touched our village. Eileen has been chosen as a vessel of his love, a messenger of his divine will. Let us not question this gift, but embrace it with open hearts. Let us come together as a community, as a family, to share this miracle with the world." The congregation responded with a resounding amen. their voices united in faith and purpose. They knew that the miracle was not just for them, but for the world. They were called to spread the message of God's love, to share the music, the light, the faith that had transformed their lives. As the vigil ended and the congregation began to disperse, there was a sense of hope and renewal in the air. The doubts and divisions that had once plagued the village were replaced by a sense of unity, of shared purpose. The miracle had unfolded, not just in the music, but in the hearts of the people. Eileen, her heart full of gratitude and love, knew that her journey was far from over. She had been chosen for a reason, and she would not rest until she had fulfilled her destiny. She knew that there would be challenges ahead, but she also knew that she was not alone. The angels were with her, guiding her, filling her with their strength and love. And so, as the villagers of Dunmore returned to their homes, their hearts full of faith, they knew that they were part of something greater than themselves. They had witnessed a miracle, and they were called to share that miracle with the world. The trial of faith had been overcome, and the path ahead, though uncertain, was filled with hope and light. Part 5. The Legacy of the Song. In the wake of the miraculous vigil, the village of Dunmore was forever changed. The light that had enveloped Eileen and filled the church with a sense of divine presence did not simply fade into memory. It lingered in the hearts of the villagers, infusing their lives with a renewed sense of purpose and faith. The miracle had not only transformed Eileen, but had left an indelible mark on the entire community, uniting them in a shared mission that transcended the boundaries of their small coastal village. The days following the vigil were filled with a sense of quiet wonder. The villagers went about their daily lives with a newfound peace, their hearts still humming with the echo of the angelic music. The skepticism and divisions that had once threatened to tear the village apart had been replaced by a collective resolve to honor the miracle and the message it carried. The village square, once bustling with arguments and doubt, had become a place of fellowship, where people gathered not just to trade goods, but to share their stories of faith and hope. Eileen, now fully aware of the role she had been chosen to play, felt the weight of her responsibility, but also the joy of fulfilling her divine purpose. She continued to live in the small cottage by the sea with her grandmother, Moira, but her life had taken on a new dimension. Pilgrims still came to Dunmore, drawn by the stories of the miracle, but now they came with a different purpose. They no longer sought proof or spectacle. They came seeking guidance, inspiration, and a touch of the divine that had so clearly manifested in this humble village. Eileen's days were filled with visitors, some who came to hear her sing, others who sought her counsel. Though she remained humble, always attributing the miracle to God and the angels, she could not deny the impact she had on those who came to her. People left Dunmore changed, their faith strengthened, their hearts lighter. Eileen became a symbol of hope, a beacon of light in a world often shrouded in darkness. But it was not just the pilgrims who were changed. The villagers themselves found their lives enriched by the presence of so many new faces. They opened their homes and hearts to the visitors, sharing not just their food and shelter, but also their stories, their prayers, and their faith. The village that had once been isolated and inward-looking had become a place of open arms and open hearts, a sanctuary for those seeking peace and renewal. Father Declan, who had played such a crucial role in guiding the village through the trials of doubt and division, found himself busier than ever. His church, once struggling to fill its pews, was now a vibrant center of worship and community. The nightly vigils continued, but they had taken on a new character. They were no longer just about the angelic music or the miracle. They were about the people, about the way the miracle had brought them together, about the way it had transformed their understanding of faith and love. During these vigils, Father Declan often spoke of the legacy of the song. He reminded the villagers and the pilgrims alike that the miracle was not just a moment in time, but a call to live their lives in a way that reflected the divine love they had witnessed. "The angels sang for us," he would say, his voice filled with emotion. not just to show us the power of God, but to remind us of the love that binds us all together. We must carry that love into the world, in everything we do. Eileen, who continued to sing during the vigils, felt the truth of Father Declan's words deeply. She knew that the music was a gift, but it was also a responsibility. It was not enough to simply listen to the angels. She had to live their message, to embody the love and peace they had brought to her life. She found herself more deeply involved in the life of the village, helping those in need, offering comfort to the sick and the sorrowful, and always singing. But as much as she gave to others, Eileen also needed moments of solitude, times when she could retreat to the cliffs or the quiet of her cottage to reflect, to pray, and to listen for the music that had become such a central part of her life. These moments of quiet were essential, a time for her to reconnect with the divine source of her gift and to draw strength for the work she knew lay ahead. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, Eileen found herself drawn once again to the cliffs. The sea was calm, its surface shimmering with the last light of the day, and the air was cool and crisp. She stood at the edge of the cliff, her face turned toward the sea, and let the sounds of the ocean fill her senses. The waves, gentle but persistent, whispered secrets that only she could hear, their rhythm a reminder of the constancy of God's presence in her life. As she stood there, she felt the familiar stirrings of the angelic music rising within her. But this time it was different. The music was not just a melody. It was a conversation, a dialogue between her and the divine. The angels were speaking to her, their voices filled with love and encouragement, but also with a gentle reminder. The time had come to share the song with the world beyond Dunmore. Eileen knew what this meant. She could not stay in the village forever, no matter how much she loved it. The miracle had not been given to her for her own sake, but for the sake of others, those who had yet to hear the music, those who were still lost in the darkness, searching for a light to guide them. She had been chosen as a vessel, and now she had to fulfill that role, to carry the music into the wider world. The decision was not easy. Eileen loved her village, her grandmother, the life she had built in Dunmore. But she also knew that the call she had received was not one she could ignore. She would leave, but she would carry Dunmore with her, in her heart, in her music. The village would always be her home, the place where the miracle had begun, but it was not the place where it would end. When Eileen shared her decision with Moira and Father Declan, they understood, though their hearts were heavy. Moira, in particular, felt the pain of impending separation. She had raised Eileen, had been her guide and protector, and the thought of letting her go filled her with sorrow. But she also knew that this was Eileen's path, one that had been laid out for her by forces beyond their understanding. Moira gave her blessing, knowing that it was the only thing she could do, knowing that Eileen's destiny was greater than anything she could have imagined. Father Declan, too, felt a deep sense of loss at the thought of Eileen leaving, but he also felt a sense of pride. He had watched her grow from a child into a young woman of incredible faith and strength, and he knew that the world needed what she had to offer. He promised to continue the work they had started together in Dunmore, to keep the village's faith strong, and to ensure that the legacy of the angelic music would live on. The day of Eileen's departure was both solemn and joyful. The entire village gathered to say their goodbyes, their hearts filled with a mixture of pride and sadness. They knew that Eileen was embarking on a journey that would take her far from them, but they also knew that she was carrying a piece of them with her. The love and faith they had shared would be the foundation of the work she would do in the world. Eileen, dressed in a simple white dress, stood at the edge of the village, her heart full of gratitude for the life she had lived there. She took a moment to look around, to etch the faces of her friends and neighbors into her memory, to breathe in the scent of the sea and the earth, to let the sound of the waves fill her one last time. And then, with a deep breath and a final prayer, she turned and began the walk down the narrow road that led away from Dunmore. But even as she left, Eileen knew that this was not an ending, but a beginning. The song of the angels would continue to guide her, to fill her with the strength and courage she needed for the journey ahead. And though the road would be long and the challenges many, she would not walk it alone. The angels would be with her, as they had been from the beginning, their voices lifting her up, their love surrounding her like a warm embrace. In the years that followed, stories of Eileen and the angelic music spread far and wide. She traveled across Ireland and eventually beyond, sharing the miracle that had started in the small village of Dunmore. Everywhere she went, she brought light to the darkness, healing to the wounded, and hope to the hopeless. Her voice, as pure and clear as ever, touched the hearts of all who heard it, reminding them of the love and grace that was always within reach. And back in Dunmore, the villagers continued to gather each evening in the small church, their voices rising in song, their hearts united in faith. They knew that Eileen was out there, somewhere in the world, carrying their love with her. And they knew that as long as they continued to live the message of the angels, as long as they kept the music alive in their hearts, the miracle of Dunmore would never fade. The legacy of the song was not just in the notes that had filled the air, but in the lives it had touched, the hearts it had changed. It was a legacy of love, of faith, of a community that had found its strength in the divine melody that had brought them together. And it was a legacy that would endure, as long as there were those willing to listen to the music of the angels and carry it into the world. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and experiences. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, God bless you.